Well, hello there from the West Indies. I'm currently on the island of St. Kitts, which is the larger of the two islands that make up St. Kitts and Nevis. Now, St. Kitts and Nevis collectively is not a large country. It's actually the smallest country in all of America. It has a population of about 45,000 people between the two islands and an area of about 250 square kilometers. So it's not particularly big. But just because it's not very big does not mean it's not important, of course. And in fact, many people have found it important enough to fight over and to spill quite a lot of blood over. And that's maybe perhaps the most interesting thing about the history of St. Kitts and Nevis is that this really, even the island of St. Kitts itself, which is just a small rock in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, really, its two main tourist attractions, Brimstone Hill and Bloody Point, are monuments to human aggressiveness over land, over territory, over culture, over national pride. There's quite a lot of drama associated with both of them. In terms of the history of Bloody Point, it marked really the end of the indigenous population on the island. Just like there's a dramatic story in Grenada about the end of the Carib population there at Carib's Leap, Bloody Point has a similarly dramatic tale, and that's one also about friendship and betrayal and love and alliances built and broken. Because what happened was that Tegramante, the Carib chief, initially was quite welcoming when Thomas Warner, a British explorer, proposed to him in 1623 that he wanted to form an English settlement here, and the English came the following year, and initially there was a good degree of positivity and cooperation between the indigenous population and the European settlers, and this was the first British settlement in all the Caribbean. And then the following year Warner invited a group of French people to form a French settlement, and the English and the French cooperated quite closely. But what happened was, as the European presence grew, the local population understandably became pretty concerned that their small island was increasingly being colonized by larger and larger groups of strange-looking people. So Tegramante got the related Carib population in other islands such as Dominica to come together, and they planned a preemptive attack on the European settlers to drive them out. But an indigenous woman called Barbie was taken as a slave wife and was in love with Thomas Warner, and she decided to warn the Europeans of the Caribs' planned attack. Now, that wasn't just because of the romantic feelings or romantic loyalties Barbie might have been feeling. It was also to do with the longer history of the Caribs and the Arawak people, because Barbie was an Arawak woman. And the history had long been that the Carib population had chased the Arawaks across the Caribbean, so maybe Barbie was looking for a bit of payback as well. But what happened was the Europeans, the English and the French, worked together to attack the Caribs preemptively, killed a lot of them in their sleep, and over the course of the ensuing battles, about 2,000 Caribs were killed, and it is said that the blood of the river ran red for 3 days, which is why it's called Bloody River, and Bloody Point is the name of the place of the battle. So the European nations of the English and French had worked quite closely together in the founding days, but just as with the Europeans and the indigenous population, the cooperation between the English and French didn't last all that long either. And there was frequent squabbles and fights between the French and the English for control of the island. And the incredibly impressive fortress of Brimstone Hill, which is probably the island's #1 tourist attraction, is a monument to the level of care that both sides took to fortify their positions and to fight each other. Now, the Brimstone Hill has also got a pretty compelling story about slavery in these islands, which I won't go into now. I will say as an aside, about 25,000 Irish slaves were brought to these islands, which as an Irishman I found quite interesting. But the overwhelming slave population were African, and they were used to construct Brimstone Hill. And for 90 years they were building this fortress until eventually the French overwhelmed it, and the British surrendered. But because of events in Europe, the island was returned under treaty to the English very soon afterwards. So here we have it, a small clump of land, but on it the dramatic stories of the clash between Europeans and indigenous populations, slavery. There's over 8 to 16 million slaves that were brought to the Americas by European powers from Africa over several hundred years, and a good number of them obviously ended up in the Caribbean, as well as I said, quite a few Irish people as well. So for a small nation, it still has a big history and plenty to say about the course of human affairs, and unfortunately quite a lot to say about human beings at their worst. But it's a very beautiful island, and I'm glad to be here.